I'm just glad we found maybe a middle ground that'll work for today.
Yes, likewise.
So did you get an opportunity? You read ahead, right?
Are we expecting anyone else?
Um, Always.
I did read it. So I have read ahead. So I have read the chapters in question. I didn't read it recently, but I have read it. So
Hmm.
I've got it in front of me now, just to refresh myself.
Before this,
I
were you
find
very?
the go on.
I was just gonna ask before this if you were very familiar with Buddhist cosmology, because for me, this is actually a lot of stuff I hadn't put a lot of study into before.
Yeah, that's essentially what I was going to say. It was when I come into Buddhism, I'm looking at practices that one can undertake to understand the world better and understand that these sort of fleeting happinesses are never going to satisfy you. That's what Buddhism sort of summarized is for me. And so when people start talking about cosmology, I do find myself wondering, is this just cultural things from the time that Buddhism arose getting thrown in and bundled in with Buddhism, or is it actually a meaningful, impactful, and important part of practice beyond just into being? Because into being, that's a practical sense of cosmology, but where the universe came from, which is what normally I associate with cosmology, although this book doesn't really say that Buddhism is trying to answer that. That, in essence, I go, does it matter? I'm here.
I have to say, I definitely empathize with what you're saying. It aligns pretty much with my mentality on it. And I think when we get into chapter 6, even the the OG Buddha himself seems to indicate with his solaces that ultimately that's not what matters. When you read the Four Solaces, his assertion of the moral life would be correct, and so he says it himself, like either it's I'm gonna pass away and find that this mattered, or I'm gonna pass away knowing I did good while I was alive, and or it doesn't matter because hatred and evil didn't touch me. And so it's interesting that while he's known for making these statements about the cosmology and the fractal nature of everything, he kind of I feel like he kind of just says it doesn't really matter. You're here. Do good.
Yeah, so I'm catching up on the subtitles,
Hmm.
but they are working. Yeah, so it reminds me, and I touched upon this once in another meeting, of Pascal's wager and a response to it. So just to give it some context, Pascal's wager is saying if it's trying to say whether you should believe in God or not, and this is an Abrahamic God for context. So saying if God exists and you believe in them, great, heaven, all those wonderful things. If God exists and you don't believe in them, well, you're in trouble. Now, if God doesn't exist and you believe in them, it's not really that big a deal.
Hmm.
And if God doesn't exist and you don't believe in them, it's still not that big a deal. So he's saying, go believe in God. Now, my objection to this is you can't force yourself to believe things like that, but
Right.
um, people took issue with this and they responded with something that sounds a lot like the solaces. So it was called the atheist's wager.
Ah.
And it's saying if a benevolent God exists, then do good, good things happen, whether you believe in them or not. If an evil if there's no benevolent God, do good, great, world's better. It doesn't matter, you just do good. The answer is do good no matter what. So
Hmm.
it
Hmm.
reminds me of the Four Solaces because it's essentially saying, doesn't matter, do what you believe to be right. Maybe the source of what right and wrong is might be different, and that's when it has a practical impact. But whether there's a God or not, I don't know. I'm just a little ape descendant, as Douglas Adams would say, going around and not really having a clue, but sometimes getting a bit above myself, thinking, oh yes, as a human, I can understand the universe, when I'm really just a speck with a monkey mind.
Absolutely. Um, yeah.
So,
That's effectively
so
what I was taking from a lot of this. I don't know what the scandas are. Other than just a breakdown of the illusions we attach ourselves to, which I think it effectively says here. Um, and how they combine to
yeah,
create the
because if we
illusion
look
we
at like the
attach
actual
to.
contents, I'm sorry,
No, it's fine. Keep going.
I didn't hear you. What illusion were you talking about?
The illusion we attach ourselves to that we begin to define as me.
Mm-hmm. And it this is going a little bit off the book here, but it's still about Buddhism. The thing I find difficult when dealing with my own practice is fine. I have some understanding, not a total understanding, but some understanding of my own limitations and what plays good for me to myself. But when we look at someone else who's suffering, and suffering in a very obtuse way,
Mm-hmm.
so they don't know they're suffering, or they're clinging to the thing, thinking it will alleviate their suffering, and it's hard to know at what level to sort of pitch things to people. Because if I say, well, there's no you to be upset, so what's going on? Right. Well, it's at least no you to identify with anyway.
Well, and that goes back to our conversations of skillful means,
And
right?
that's
Like
not
that's
really
not
helpful
helpful.
to a lot of people. It's yeah, yeah, exactly. And that I find difficult. And so when I'm reading this, coming back to the content again, when I'm reading this cosmology where it says, quote, the universe is believed to be infinitely old, I'm wondering, is, is that a skillful means to try and satisfy somebody somewhere? Is that trying to fit in with the cosmological views of the time? Is that actually an instance of where those who practice Buddhism, because keep in mind that we're really reading writings and oral traditions,
Well, and then
not
if you
the
go
direct
under
words
the
of the Buddha.
multidimensional faith heading, you see where it says the temporal cosmology of Buddhism clearly reflects its Hindu origins. And I think you're on point with it
Yeah,
really being about the culture and the times and what was going on around and finding ways that these things can connect to each other to help those at the time understand and begin to go on that path of enlightenment.
yeah, and it becomes difficult in the sense of, so I have a book here by Bhikkhu Bodhi, um, called The Noble Eightfold Path. Great book if you want to read it. Bhikkhu Bodhi is one of the scholars that I feel, and it is a feeling, that elicits more authority because he seems to take a few translations of things and so on, and spend a lot of time
Mm-hmm.
doing it. And during this, when he's talking about right view, he's saying right view, and he names a bunch of very specific things, talking about the nature of karma and so on, and saying, and if this isn't the view that you hold is the wrong word, but I haven't got a better one. Um, if this isn't the view, then it is wrong view. And so there are right view, at least according to Bhikkhu Bodhi's understanding of the text, is not just non-attachment to views and listening, although that is an important part. There are specific views within it that one should arrive at. And so when I read things like this, I have to wonder, this is being presented, and how do I differentiate between a view that just seems like it doesn't matter to me, or actually doesn't matter because I haven't got a total understanding of Buddhism, and maybe there's something really impactful and important about this I'm missing. And so it makes me wonder, how do you differentiate between the two okay, you can apply a policy of just listening all the time and weighing things up, but how there are some views where I listen to them and I go, nice view, doesn't seem to have an impact on my life. And is that me discarding things, or is that me actually reflecting my own culture right now and applying it to Buddhism? And am I doing exactly the same thing we might be trying to critique in this text?
On a related note, I was thinking about how one of the things I firmly believe in is that as you study, embrace, and meditate on truth, reflect or meditate on truth, the easier it's going to get to identify it in other places. And so I think when we get these ideas of things not mattering, kind of maybe perhaps like this cosmology, and maybe I'm just attached to this idea too thoroughly, but that it's not a harmful belief, but it's not a necessary one.
Yeah, fair point. This is almost coming back to Pascal's wager again.
Right.
This is difficult for me, and I think part of it comes from how. So to sidetrack a little bit, I was listening to a book on Zen called The Three Pillars of Zen, and it made a very good point about the job of translators. And we kind of knew this, but it went into great detail about it, and talking about how the translators for the books are only practicing Buddhists and so on. But even then, there's this interpretive nature, and so when people look at the planes of existence, just to take a concrete example, some people take them as a metaphorical thing, as you're in certain states of mind during the day, and sometimes you're acting in a way that would be like the hell realm, and sometimes you'd be sort of in the middle realms, and sometimes you'd be in the sort of bodhisattva realms.
Mm-hmm.
And just as a way of categorizing how mindful you are, for example, in that moment. Then there are those who will take this and say, no, you will literally die and go to another realm. This, as much as anything can die. And and I'm there going, well, these things do have an impact of practice. These matter a little bit, as much as anything can.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense.
Because if I'm if I'm practicing and I'm just watching myself sort of in a metaphorical sense going between realms of existence, okay, yeah, this is I should, accept that this is impermanent and I'm going to move between realms, and then I go up into this better realm and wonderful, and stay there for as long as is reasonable. Suppose I get to the point where I can be completely happy in this life, in the no suffering sense, not in the temporary I got a bag of sweets, yay sense. As good as sweets are. Then this has a massive impact because it says your work isn't done because there's another life coming, and it, the nice part of this is in my own practice, at least, the things you do in response to this are remarkably similar, not exactly the same, but they are remarkably similar. And then when you bring my favorite topic, interbeing, into the mix, then they become even more similar. But there is a tangible impact on the way you live your day-to-day life based upon what is meant or which interpretation of this planes of existence you hold.
I think you've got a really solid point there, yeah.
Life is hard. We shouldn't get too worried about clinging to getting some perfect
Truth.
interpretation, because, well, we know what happens when you cling to things.
Suffering.
What did you... Yeah, it's that little thing whispering in your rear going, hey, this thing's really nice. It's actually suffering. Just don't tell them. That thing, like that achievement you want to get, you're going to feel great when it happens, right? Right? No, you're not. You're just going to move on to the next one.
Mm-hmm.
So, what did you get from this cosmological chapter?
A better understanding of what those who do put a lot of practice into it might see it as. As I said, it wasn't something I had really researched before, and that it was an interesting opportunity to kind of reflect on the more quote unquote eternal aspects of Buddhism. I think I spent a lot of time only thinking about this physical life and not moving beyond it so much. And it was just an interesting exercise in thought, I guess. And yeah, what I really
Would you point
liked.
out that there is.
Hmm?
Go on.
Oh, I was just gonna say real quick. One of the quotes that I really liked is, "If good actions are not rewarded, good outcomes, and bad actions with bad outcomes, we can still perceive the truth of pursuing mindful awakening and skillful action."
Yeah. I mean, the way that. So I want to caution, especially for anyone listening, the whole theory thing. Theories are wonderful, but the analogy I like to give is you can watch people
Right.
play basketball all day. You're not going to be any better at it.
What?
The practice comes first. So, with this in mind, when I'm sat there meditating and karma's coming into awareness, there are some aspects that have a very practical impact on the way you live. And the understanding of karma that I've gotten thus far through that, and again, this is just me, is not one of you do good, good thing happens. At least not in that simplistic a manner. It's one of you do something that makes the world or existence in general have conditions that are more conducive to mindfulness and awakening. And this is the world you live in. And if you are reborn, which can't, it depends how you interpret rebirth. But let's say you are, in a very literal sense, then that's the world you're born into.
Mhm.
So there's an interpretation of karma beyond just almost like an. It sounds like an Abrahamic kind of view has been imprinted on Buddhism when we talk about good means good things happen,
Mhm. Yeah.
because it's almost like a higher order of ethics is being pasted down upon you, saying this good, this bad, do things or be punished, and it's not like, again, my understanding of it, but it's not like somebody's going to come along and punish you. You're just going to end up punishing yourself.
Mhm.
Just through, if I set up a giant wrecking ball next to my head right now and let go, it's gonna hurt me. It's not a matter of karma. It's just an emotion. It's not karma. It's just you're
It's just
essentially setting yourself
consequences
up
of
to get hit in
action.
the face. And like that's what's gonna happen. It's physics. Yeah, it's just more, yeah, consequences, and ones that if you mistake clinging and temporary things as happiness, you'll end up setting up. So I don't know, you go and chase a particularly nice meal at a restaurant and you're attached to the idea of it being amazing because you're spending so much money, and then you've essentially set up the wrecking ball for when it doesn't meet your expectation. While if you go in there and say, ah, food was as it was, there's no wrecking ball.
Well, and then I think that gets into another tangential commentary I would have about the self fulfilling prophecy of expectations that you set, right? And we do this not only with food, for instance, okay, I paid a lot of money, I expect it to be good. So then we set ourselves up mentally into almost a placebo effect of like, yeah, that was amazing because I paid so much money for it. But then we do that with people, right? We set up an expectation, we or for ourselves even. And so it's amazing the depths with which these clinging expectations just dive into every aspect of our lives.
Yeah, it's almost like again, everything we kind of look at in Buddhism has a lot of different ways of looking at it. But if you could view the entirety of Buddhism as expectations, as far as I can see,
Yeah, I'd agree.
because if I'm sat here now, so I have a pain in my foot right now, and if I expect to not have a pain in my foot, like the second arrow is sort of hitting, if you know the analogy, the pain is being doubled. This pain in my foot is not actually a problem if I don't have any expectation. It's just there. It's like, oh hi, it's like a leaf passing in the wind again. And so this, the thing I see a lot, and I definitely did this, um, and sometimes still do it. I have to catch myself with mindfulness. Is meditating with expectations.
Mm-hmm.
So not just expectations of fancy feelings, essentially. You know, like, whoa, I had this really cool experience, and like there
Fancy
was colours and
feelings.
everything, and big booty sounds, and basically you took LSD is the kind of thing a lot of people are looking for. But if you meditate and think, okay, so I'm not going to suffer anymore, it's like, no, you are going to suffer, and that's okay. And it's like, oh, what do you mean? Why would I meditate if I'm still going to suffer?
Right.
It's in my practice, perhaps, for example, here's an example of unsatisfactoriness rooted in practice in a way that shows you that the practice is a vehicle rather than the end in some cases. So if I sit down and I'm trying to concentrate, with right concentration and doing meditation and concentration, I'm expecting to concentrate. There is an expectation attached to this practice. It is something that can be satisfied or not satisfied. And sure, we can do it with or without attachments, but equally, if we were to just let go of this and ironically not try, just just be however it is, not worry about concentration or any of these things, we'd actually be happy. And so it's a lovely paradox. And yet, in the practical sense, and maybe this is where experience goes beyond theory, in the practical sense, yeah, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to do that meditation, even though I know expectations are a problem, because there's something beyond words that means it makes sense.
I think also this is a great demonstration of how difficult it can be to be somebody trying to help others do these things. Because how do you tell somebody, like, all right, go sit over there, close your eyes, and expect nothing?
You know, I would say, so I have this a lot, because for whatever reason, maybe it's because I'm so bleeding vocal, um, I do have a lot of people messaging me like that, and I have those conversations a lot. And there are people I've spoken to, more than one, who have sat there theorizing all day about Buddhism and just not sat in practice, approaching it like physics, but physics without experiments. And it can be very difficult because it's almost like you have to satisfy, justify the meditation through theory before people will do it. And so
Hmm.
sometimes the skillful means is not to lie about it, but to say, would you like to be happier?
Hmm.
And they go, yes. Practice this and you will be. And it's not a lie, but it is putting expectations on it.
Yeah, and so that's the
And
double-edged sword of it all, right? Like,
yeah, there's so many paradoxes. There's self and not self. There's the neither. There's both, and there's something that doesn't fit into any of those. There's expectations to attain enlightenment, but also to do that, you need to drop your expectations. Um, and there's just there's this. It's just words again, isn't it?
yeah.
I guess this is why koans is so wonderful because they just They just take you to words,
Well,
say, look, they're an absolute mess, get over it and move on.
I think I'm always really impressed by the results of the oral tradition that was Buddhism for the first 300 years. Because I read all this writing and stuff, and I'm like, man, look how much they managed to get down the line. Anyway, side note.
Yeah. And this is another reason why practice is important, because suppose you forget, but you've been practicing, you could arrive at the same point again.
Yep. Well, and so I've heard it said before
So
by
you,
teachers and in writing before is that you already have every tool necessary to reach enlightenment inside of you. But we often it's those attachments again that get to us and push us to seek outside of ourselves for that information.
in popping back to sort of cosmology and also a bit of what it is to be human again. One of the things that I find, I question how skillful it can be, is what I'm trying to say, about when people say you are already a Buddha and have Buddha nature, because
Oh
in
yeah,
a
no, I
world
totally
where
agree.
ego
That's not
is
skillful at all. It earlier in my practice, that absolutely frustrated
I
the
don't know if
the
it's
heck out of
skillful.
me. No, I
Well,
don't.
but is it though? Because
I think the skillful part comes in is knowing the student. If you are a person able to perceive when that would be helpful to say, then it can be skillful. Because the right people, that's gonna click, right? Like they're primed, they're ready. Like, oh, I get it, that makes sense. But then there are so many students, so many people on this path that would not be helpful at all. That would push them further away. And I think that's true of almost any tidbit of knowledge that we have, or wisdom or insight. It's that the skillful means is knowing when to deposit it or who to deposit it to, because it doesn't make sense to everyone.
so there's one way you could think about the general saying you are Buddha, Buddha nature, and all the rest of it. That is skillful, even though even for the people where it will indulge their ego, um, and that's in the sense of, suppose you've got a person who suffers like we all do, and you say to them, you have this Buddha nature, you just need to kind of learn to see it. And they go, oh yes, I'm a Buddha, ego, gobble, gobble, gobble. And then they start practicing. You've got them practicing. And then perhaps through practice, they'll learn to understand why that egotistic sense is a problem. So almost bait, just saying, come on, ego, come on, come and take the bait. And maybe the indulgence of the ego is deliberate, because it's a thing that we all have that you can use to bait practice out of somebody.
I think that's a really good and interesting insight. Yeah.
Because for me, I got into this through egotism, essentially, through being. So to give you a sort of a quick run through of why it makes sense. Um, so in school, I was always the guy who got the really good grades and so on. And okay, I went off on a women college. Well, you wouldn't call it college. I don't know what you would call it. When I was 16, that thing.
Mhm.
Um, and I was studying music and I got great grades in that. And whatever I kind of did, especially if it was academic and theoretical, where I could memorize things and say them back,
Ah.
then I would do really well. And so, going through my life, I come to Buddhism and go, I'm going to learn and be really good at this Buddhism thing, because it's just ego going, another thing to grab onto and be good at. I like being good at things. And I understand that. I can understand my past self wanting to be good at things. And it worked, because I jumped in, was like, yeah, I'm going to learn all about this Buddhism stuff and be really great at it. And then it's like, yeah, fuck you, like, lose your ego. I was like, oh, shit. Forgive my language.
No, you're fine.
But it did. It was the ego got me in there. And the ego said, look at this. I spent 3 years learning theoretically and practicing surface level mindfulness. I guess you'd call it hyper westernized mindfulness, where it's like you're trying to get rid of
Mhm.
your stress, that kind of thing, and then started to really go for it, because that 3 years had set the and all that theory had said, actually, this thing you're doing is like paracetamol. It's not curing the illness, it's just making it a bit more bearable. um,
Ah.
and I guess Buddhism is like that in a sense, but at a deeper level. You're still human. um, and so then you take this and you start to practice and learn to be okay with pain, and all the biggest problems in my life have rather than being solved, just ceased to be a problem. And ego was how it started.
I empathize with your story.
Glad that you've I'm glad that, well, that implies that you've got less suffering, so I'm glad to hear that. Hmm. There's a quote in here somewhere I really liked. Hmm. It reflects as well the difference between theoretical knowledge. I mean, I tend to bang on about the same points, but I believe they're important. So, theoretical knowledge versus practical. So if you say to somebody, "You're going to die," they go, "I know I'm going to die." Then you look at them and you somehow get in their head and say, "You are going to die," and it's like, and they really get it. It's like,
Mhm.
whoa, oh dear, and you watch them crumble in front of you, and that's less skillful means if they're not in a position to handle really understanding it. And like, for example, if you've got someone who clings to meaning, telling them that they're going to die in that really deep way can destroy them and lead them to suicide.
Oof.
Um, but
Yeah.
yeah, because people get nihilistic and lose meaning and so on. While if you teach them to not need meaning first and then destroy it, then that's maybe more helpful. Why do we need meaning? Well, this whole cosmology thing is essentially stemming from that half the time, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. Our desperate clinging to a need for meaning when sometimes things just happen.
I mean, why do you think that people want meaning? I mean, it seems to be something beyond a culture, beyond a moment in time. It seems to be in various ways throughout history, whether it's through religion or through looking at the wonder of the universe and finding meaning in investigating it. Then why do we? What is it about being human that drives you towards meaning?
Well, Des thinks that it's because that it's the curse of a logical mind. Like, wild animals aren't out there wondering why they're a lion or why they're a cat or why they're a horse, right? They're just doing. They're doing what they need to survive, and they go about their business. But because we have this painful ability to reflect and to think and to see on a global or universal scale, I think it's a curse in many ways of feeling out of place because we're not wild animals with an incredibly obvious place in the ecosystem.
I mean, we are wild animals.
Oh,
We just
yes.
give ourselves a special place because we're anthropomorphic. We're like, oh yeah,
Mhm.
people are great, says the person. Look, oh, look at God. God's definitely like a person. Right?
Right.
If we were horses, then we make a horse god. Um, so it's. And by the way, for anyone listening, doesn't mean there's not a God. I have no idea. I just find it suspect that we give it a certain form. Um,
Total sus.
so the the animal that essentially isn't questioning. Let's just take an animal that we really don't think is questioning things so much. Like, I don't know, a frog.
Frog.
Frog's probably not, thinking too much about cosmology.
Oh gosh,
Or a mouse,
autocorrect.
given you. Oh, that was a brilliant.
Closed caption, why? Anyway, yes, frog or mouse?
Just for those listening, it auto-corrected to Trump.
That's a whole other can of worms. Not going into today.
Although, actually, no, let's one point I can make on Trump. He's a human being like us and has the same sort of needs as us. Whether we agree with his actions or not is a different matter, but he suffers like the rest of us.
Yes, true.
So, if we look at a mouse, then it's, I'm assuming here, from what we can observe about its behavior, it seems to just chase instinctive needs.
Right.
Which we also do. And that's the thing I want to draw us to. We think we're the rational animal. If you look at Immanuel Kant, he believes that we are the blessed because we are the rational animal and it's our nature to be rational. But if you actually look at what we're doing, we're really not rational in a pure logical game theory sense. Well, okay.
We have the capacity to be.
If someone... It's like my little boy when he started asking me why the black currants were purple. And it's like, and he kept asking me why, and I was going into physics, talking about photons and all sorts, and he's just like, but why? I guess it's the most basic question we can ask, and maybe that's why we end up with meaning. But another way we can look at our own ability to rationalize is still just an animalistic instinct. Because if we take the evolutionary approach to this, it came up for a reason. Well, I'm using human terms, reason, but it came up because it happened to keep existing. And so you've got, I don't know, someone who's terrified of spiders. You might say this is an irrational fear, but really it's quite rational. From an evolutionary point of view, you've not harmed yourself by running away from this spider, really. It only takes one poisonous spider to make it worth it. It only takes one thing that's remotely like a spider to be worth it. And so all our animalistic natures are really rational when you look at it like that. And so all of this stuff that we think about, the tool building ability that has gone beyond the obvious rational is really just us taking the ability to ask why. So why did this crop grow, or why did this plant not satisfy my hunger, or whatever it was originally used for? Why did this weapon protect me? And we just kept asking why, and it really got out of hand.
Yeah.
We're here going, why am I alive? And we need maybe another few million years or 100,000 years to be realistic, of evolution. Because maybe we're just the bacterium of the world when you look at the grand scheme of things. Maybe we're just ultimately not the rational animal. We are the most irrational one from the perspective of some other being that will supersede us.
Right.
Like maybe a machine.
Fancy.
So we're here asking for meaning, and we think about us being above animals or better than animals or so on, but we're really just animals that like our own way of operating.
Yep.
And then suffer because of it, weirdly.
Yes.
It's all weird, isn't it?
Every bit of it.
Anyway, that was my philosophical ramble for the day.
Excellent.